in Sapporo, there are about three, let me count them real quick. So we have the Asaikawa steak, we have the Sapporo, there's the two Sapporo steaks. So I think there's 3 steaks and then 1 district. And that's the east side of Hokkaido, which is the island that Sapporo's on. The Saikawa steak is in the north, then the 2 Sapporo steaks, they cover the west side and east side of Sapporo, along with the south. The temple is currently being built in Atsubatsu-ku, which is a part of Sapporo, and it is amazing. It's so beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Just from pictures, it's not completely built yet, but they're going. So if anybody gets a chance to go right now, you'll be able to see the structure and probably be able to see it complete. I imagine they'll have the groundbreaking in about 2 years, I think. And I think that's what the date is set for. A beautiful temple. I mean, just imagine taking a Buddhist temple and a regular LDS temple and putting it together. And that's going to be the Sapporo temple. And it has a beautiful Japanese garden with cherry blossoms and little bridges and everything. It's going to be beautiful. Sapporo is known for its agriculture. A lot of cows, a lot of sheep, a lot of corn, a lot of potatoes. Just a lot of produce that gives the food for the rest of Japan. So Hokkaido is known for having the best food in all of Japan, especially fish, because there's just a lot of fish in the waters around there. One of my areas, Kushiro, was my first area. The sushi was, this long and like that thick, compared to how sometimes you have more rice than there is fish on there. But it is so good, so fresh and juicy. Squid is also very popular in some areas. You actually can eat a live squid. You just pour soy sauce on it and it starts moving around, but you have to eat it. It's a fun experience.
So the Kobe Mission basically extends from Miyaken, which is just a little bit east of Kyoto, and it goes all the way almost to Hiroshima. It goes just about to like Yonago and Tottori. So it kind of goes there, and it also includes an island called Shikoku. So it's kind of like the southwest side of Japan. Minus like Fukuoka and that far south area. But Kobe is like a really, really big, like it has a harbor, so there's a lot of shipping and stuff that goes on there. It's a really big like industrial city. Kyoto is actually the old capital of Japan. So it's got a lot of like Buddhist temples, it's got a lot of Shinto like shrines everywhere. They have the old like Emperor's Palace like smack dab in the middle of Kyoto. Some of the best universities in Japan are in either Kyoto or Kobe. There's also some up in Tokyo that are like supposed to be really, really good colleges. The church is actually doing pretty well, I feel like, in the Kobe Mission. There's a stake in Kyoto, there's a stake in Osaka. There's 2 stakes in Osaka. I think there was just barely a new stake formed in Shikoku, that island, down on the south side. So things are going pretty well. It's pretty far away from the temple. There's the closest temples. Well, if you're on the south side of the Kobe Mission, it's going to be the Fukuoka temple. If you're on the north side, it's probably going to be the Tokyo temple. Either way, it's about, I think, 8 hours by train for people to get there. So it's a significant sacrifice for members to be able to go to the temple, but they do fairly often. It's really, really cool. Unfortunately, missionaries don't get to go at the present time, but and that was what I missed. Yeah, that was like the biggest thing I missed, I think, was going to the temple. Especially in Kyoto, a lot of people identify as Buddhist, but it seems like a lot of people identify as Buddhist as more of a culture. Like, I am Japanese, therefore I am Buddhist. But that is also kind of where, I guess you could say, some of the headquarters of Buddhism and of like Shintoism, which is like the old religion of Japan, is in Kyoto. And so in those areas, people tend to be very, very, I guess you could say, like, defensive of, like, they are Buddhist, and so that's what they do. But sometimes they are very willing to talk with you about our religion. Honestly, like, most people really haven't heard of Mormons. There was a few people, like really, really old people, sometimes know about polygamy, and that's kind of funny, because like they'll be like, "Oh, okay, where are your wives?" And, like, I don't have any. I'm sorry, I'm single. But by and large, like, people in Japan tend to have kind of a negative view of religion, of like organized religion, especially of Christianity. Like, there's been a lot of, I guess you could say, like, bad experiences that Japan as a country has had with different religions, and so that becomes sometimes a little bit of a barrier, is that people see you as someone who is trying to like force other people to join your church, when the reality is we're trying to help people come unto Christ, and we're trying to help them to have more truth in their lives and to be happier and to be able to receive that eternal life that Jesus Christ speaks of. And so a lot of I think the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest misconceptions that Japanese people have, is that you're trying to force them to join the church, when in reality that's not really what you're there for. Word of wisdom is a pretty huge challenge in Japan. The culture of Japan is, at least especially for the men who are businessmen, they'll go together with their company and their other coworkers, and they'll go and have drinking parties. And so sometimes asking someone to quit alcohol is sometimes asking them to put in jeopardy their job and their livelihood, which is a significantly harder commitment than just giving up an addictive substance. Smoking as well is something that is extremely common, and something that a lot of people have a pretty hard time stopping. Pornography usage can be pretty prevalent. As far as law of chastity goes, I don't really know too many Japanese people who live together who aren't married, but there's a lot of pornography usage, especially with middle-aged men, and so that can be a challenge as well. But I feel like when people are able to successfully keep the word of wisdom and to keep the law of chastity, it's usually because they have a testimony of something in the gospel. They have a testimony that Joseph Smith was a prophet, or they have a testimony that the Book of Mormon is true, or they have a testimony that Jesus loves them. And because they have that testimony, they have more of a desire to put forth the effort to stop smoking and to stop drinking and to stop looking at pornographic materials, things like that. That was really, I feel like, the biggest thing that helped. There's certain programs and other things that help people out of addictions that are present in Japan, mostly missionary-led discussions, things like that. But the biggest thing is, I feel like, that testimony and that faith in Jesus Christ, that they can be healed from that addiction, that they can change, and they can move forward. My first area was Shimogamo in Kyoto, and I served there for about 6 months, and then I went to Osaka. I went to Ibaraki, Osaka, and then after that I served there for about 3 months, and then I went to Yonago, which is clear on the other side of the mission, and I served there for about 5.5 months. I served in Matsue for about 2 weeks. There was a little situation that I was there for a little while, and then I jumped back over close to Kobe, and I was in Kakogawa. And then after Kakogawa, I went almost back to my first area. I went to Fushimi in Kyoto, which is just south of my first area, and that's where I finished my mission.
the Kobe mission has actually been opened and closed and reopened several times. There was once, inside the boundaries of the Kobe mission, there was once an Osaka mission, there was once a Okayama mission, there was once a Hiroshima mission. So like as far as where the headquarters of missions are in Japan, it's changed a lot. And when I actually got there just a few months after the Hiroshima mission had closed and those missions had merged. So when I got there, a lot of the mission, like there was kind of like this distinction of class between Kobe missionaries and former Hiroshima missionaries, and the Hiroshima missionaries were still kind of catching up on how the mission was different. As far as like what would make it different, so I would think that the two Tokyo missions are probably the ones that have the most missionaries in Japan, because that's where the biggest population is. The biggest difference between the Kansai region that covers the Kobe mission and Tokyo would be, I would say, food and language. People kind of say that Kansai is the south of the dirty south of Japan. It's where there's some really, really, really colloquial dialects. A lot of people in Tokyo have kind of migrated there from all over the country, but a lot of people in Kansai, and especially the small towns, have lived there their whole life. Their families have lived there their whole life, so they have this very unique dialect and way of speaking. They're a lot more traditional. And in some ways, they're a little bit more warm. They're a little bit more inviting, maybe not even necessarily to the idea of religion and listening to missionaries, but they're like, if you knock on a door of someone in a town of only 50,000 people, and there's these two, blonde kids on the doorstep, they'll invite you in and give you something to drink. They might not want to hear what you say, but they're a little bit warmer, whereas people in bigger cities are a little bit more hustling, bustling, in a hurry. It is, of course, the vast majority of the mission is Japanese, and the whole nation in general just doesn't have a lot of immigrants, but you'd be surprised. As missionaries, you just kind of run into them a lot. I feel like on a mission, you kind of turn over the rocks that nobody else ever notices. So there's one area in the mission that used to have a Portuguese-speaking branch, because there's a lot of Brazilians that live there. I think because of there's certain factories there that hire people from Brazil. There's actually a decent number of Brazilians kind of in little pockets here and there throughout the mission. There was one area I served in where there were lots of people from the Philippines, and I actually taught... I think I taught people from Peru and from Nepal. And then also in Kobe in particular, there's several universities, and there are just lots and lots of foreign exchange students from China. And that was actually, so my first two transfers were actually in the mission home, not as an office elder, just, we actually just were, the mission president just brought me and my trainer, and I guess it's called he whitewashed us into the mission home. So like we had resources and knew what we were doing, but we were but anyway, we actually taught more Chinese foreign exchange students than we taught Japanese people at that time. And that's actually, I think, one of the most important things that happens in Japan as far as missionary work goes, because because people from mainland China just don't have access to the gospel. So that's a really unique opportunity that you get if you serve in Kobe and a couple other big cities that have universities in them. But when I was on my mission, there were from what I knew, about 100,000 members in Japan. The percentage of that's active, I don't know, but I would imagine it's very, very little, much less than 50%, if not 20 or 30. As far as the Kobe mission, it's very geographically big. I was there from 2010 to 2012. And during that time, it was usually around 120 missionaries. I got to visit them last year, and obviously because of when the age requirement was changed for missionaries, they had a huge influx of missionaries, and I think now they have around 260, so more than double in size. And I actually was thinking it wouldn't surprise me if it split eventually, because it's very geographically big. It goes from, so I guess Kobe is pretty much the most eastern part of the mission, and then it goes west all the way to I guess Shimane-ken. So there's an area called Yonago that's I think, and actually Izumo, I think is the most western part, but it's, I think, possibly the geographically the biggest mission in Japan. That, or maybe Sapporo, I'm not sure, but it's pretty big. So there's a really big variety of big cities and very, very small country towns in the mission. And so there are how many stakes? I think 5 stakes in the mission. And each of those are made up of about 4 to 6, probably 4 to 8 wards. And those usually have about, I would say on average, anywhere from like 60 to 100 people attending. And then there are, how many? I think there's 3 districts, and they have lots of branches, and those branches can be anywhere. There's actually some branches that are really big. I never served in one, but I know there was one branch that had over 100 people attending, but it was just because of the geographic location and the makeup of priesthood holders that it hadn't become a ward yet. And there was another branch I served in that had this beautiful new building, about 80 members attending. But I also served in a branch that had about 3 members attend every week. So there's a really, really big variety as far as membership goes. As far as the religious background of Japan, it's I guess like the answer you'd find in a textbook is that it's Shinto and Buddhist, but really Japan, I would say, is agnostic. If you ask people about religion in Japan, they will say, I'm Buddhist, which honestly just means that they're Japanese. They are traditional. They have a shrine for their ancestors in their home, if they're the oldest son, that there are certain holidays where there are certain rituals attached to your ancestors. And I don't think it's that people don't believe in it. I think they do, and it's important. And I think they're great traditions, and there's actually a lot of truth to them, but it doesn't really affect their lives like Christianity does, and especially like our faith does. It's much more just, this is how it's always been, so this is how we do it. It's honestly, to me, it's more similar to how we as Americans, like when we want to move into a house and we want to buy a car and we want to have a job and we want to have a white picket fence. That's just the tradition. So when you ask someone to believe in a God who is all-seeing, all-knowing, knows us individually, who expects certain things of us, wants us to keep commandments, live our lives a certain way, it's completely foreign. It's very, very different for them, and difficult to understand, I think. So for that reason, and that doesn't mean that there aren't prepared people in Japan. They are everywhere. There are people who are ready to hear the gospel and who need that kind of religion in their lives. But it's foreign. So for a lot of people, I think it takes a lot of explanation, kind of, I guess, just holding their hand through the process that, once you believe in God, he expects this of you, and it's for your better good. And it's not just a club you join that makes you feel good every now and then. I served my first 2 transfers in Kobe, and then I actually served in 7 areas. And then as far as big cities go, I served my 3rd transfer in Osaka, which is the biggest city in the mission. And then I also served in Himeji, which is about 500,000 people. And also in Nara, which is a really big tourist destination, has about 500,000 people as well. So those were probably the 4 big cities I served, and everything else was very rural.
So I remember getting my call to the Japan Nagoya Mission, and I thought I had heard of most of the missions in the world, but I had no idea where Nagoya was. But Nagoya is located just a few hours south of Tokyo and a few hours north of Osaka, and it's right in between those 2 major cities. So if you ever tell anybody who is Japanese that you lived in Nagoya for 2 years, they're always like, oh, that's cool because you can go to Tokyo and go to Osaka and go to Kyoto, but I've never been to any of those places, but someday. But Nagoya in the Nagoya Mission, there's 4 stakes and 1 district. There's the Nagano district, which is where they had the Olympics in 1998. It's very mountainous and gets really cold in the winter, really nice summers. And then there's the Kanazawa stake, the Nagoya stake, the Nagoya East stake, and the Shizuoka stake. And Shizuoka is where Mount Fuji is, actually. So maybe the Tokyo missionaries will tell you that Mount Fuji's in their mission, but the Fuji ward and the city of Fuji and most of Mount Fuji is in our mission. Oh, George Albert Smith, when he was an apostle, he went to Yokohama, which is in the Tokyo mission. He opened Japan for missionary work, and from there it started spreading, and it came to Nagoya, and from there just spread to the rest of the mission. There was a period of time where there were no missionaries there just due to war and other factors, but yeah, the church has been in Japan since 1901, and in Nagoya and the surrounding wards and stakes, it's a little bit more new. I remember some of the areas I served in, there were members there who were the first people that were baptized into that ward. So that was really cool to see kind of the legacy. But yeah, the church is growing in Japan. There was actually in one of my wards that I served in, there was a family that they had 4 generations of members, which was huge for Japan. Because most people are converts or second generation, and so for this family to have 4 generations of members, to them it was a sign that the church was really taking root and starting to expand. Like I said, there's 4 stakes in one district, and I think there's about 38 wards and branches. Depending on where you go, the branches can be as small as 6 to 10 people, or as large as even 200, 250 people. So there's quite a range of wards and branches, as well as cities and kind of suburbs and rural areas. Yeah, the Nagoya Mission's really, really different wherever you go. I think Nagoya is the 3rd or 4th largest city in Japan. It's very industrial. Lots of people come there for their jobs. But if you just travel a couple hours north of that, you're in Nagano, where it's very rural. That's where those really small branches are with just a few people. And then you head over to Kanazawa, and it's really hilly. There's really pretty like cliffs and coasts. And then there's some really hot areas in the south with some really pretty beaches. And then there's also some really green areas to the east where they grow a lot of tea. So there's really a little bit of everything in the Nagoya Mission as far as terrain and weather goes. Yeah, so some famous places in the Nagoya Mission. Like I said, Nagano is where they held the Olympics in 1998. So it's a really small town, but they held the Olympics there, so they're really proud of that. And also the Toyota factory, where they make the cars, that's located in just a couple hours, maybe just an hour from Nagoya. Mount Fuji is a big thing.
Like land-wise, it's not covering a huge area. I think the farthest area is about a 3-hour train ride from the farthest, area over to the mission home, from like one side to the other. And so it's not like huge, but there's a ton of people there. And it depends on where you go, because in some places there's like no one until you get to the train station, and then there's like tons and tons of people there. Most of the people there are Buddhist, or they'll at least say that they're Buddhist. if they're not really doing anything else, then they'll usually just say that. But no, a lot of people are Buddhist, and then you have a few other people, very small number, who are Shinto, and some are Mushukyo, or no religion, as they say. And there's, some other scattered ones. There are some Christian churches, but there's not as much. And so a lot of people don't actually have a whole lot of understanding about, Jesus Christ. And so when you start teaching them about Jesus Christ, oftentimes it's new for them. The extent of their knowledge is basically he was an important religious person and he died on the cross. And that's about what they get. And then there's some things that are significant to the Tokyo South Mission. I think the mission in Japan originally started and was dedicated in Yamato, Japan. And that one is within our mission. It's one of the areas there. And so there's a ton of church history there. about how the missions, first started, how missionary work first started in Japan. It started there in the Tokyo South Mission, or what's now the Tokyo South Mission. And let's see, there's lots of other, really cool areas that we have in Japan, but that's the biggest one that I can think of as far as the, church historical significance. Most of the churches in Japan are wards. I think there was one branch in Orawara when I was there, and then pretty much everywhere else has been a ward. And then I think with Japan, it's interesting because whenever, expanding is really strange because, in most places, like, as far as I understand, when a ward gets big enough and it splits, then it's able to form a couple wards, and then, it's easier and the people actually end up getting closer together because there's not as many people. But in Japan, it's kind of the reverse. Whenever you start a new ward, your attendance drops significantly because with Japan, they like to know everyone that's there, and when they don't know any of the other people, then they're naturally very shy and it's uncomfortable for them, so you lose some people, and so it's very hard to kind of split off into multiple wards sometimes. And usually, most of the time, except in a few of the bigger areas, you'll have one ward in one area, and then you just go to that one ward. My mission started July 2012 and ended August 2014. Let's see, I served in Takao, Orawara, Sagamihara, Hibarigaoka, Kichijoji, and Kawasaki.
The Tokyo Mission has a lot of people, and actually it depends on the area which you serve. When you serve in like downtown Tokyo, it is, I don't know numbers for the number of people there, but tons of people. Anywhere you go, you'll see people, and they have no space, so they can't build out, they build up, so lots of tall buildings, lots of people in those tall buildings. And then when you get out to the countryside, then there's a lot of old people, not as many people on the streets. It's kind of slower paced. It goes up as north as Niigata, the Niigata prefecture, and there's an island, actually Sado Island is in our mission now. And then south it is in Tokyo, which Tokyo itself is huge, and so it's hard to define exactly, but the city of Tokyo, of course, is included in the mission. There's a temple in Tokyo, and the missionaries get to go there every transfer. Once a transfer. That's on P Day. The Tokyo mission has so many different kinds of people. So officially there's an English ward, there's 2 English wards and a Brazilian branch. So they speak Portuguese there, and then Japanese. But if you know like Tagalog, that will definitely come in handy. Nepalese, that would come in handy. Towards the end, it was around 250 missionaries.
How many elders and sisters?
Oh, over 80 sisters. I know there are over 80. Maybe it's up to like 100 now. But about halfway point of my mission is like 80 sisters. When I first got there, then like all the sisters knew all the other sisters, but then sisters started coming, and then I started not knowing all of their names because there were so many of them. When I got my mission call, my bishop, he looked at me and he said, "Do you like rice?" And I said, "No, I don't like rice." And he said, "Do you like fish?" It's like, "No." He's like, "Do you want to die?" Like, no. So I learned pretty fast to like fish and rice because I didn't really have an option. Japanese food, I feel like, is really different than American food. And now that I'm back, I feel like I don't know what American food is. But they eat a lot of fish, a lot of rice, a lot of vegetables, a lot of...
Do they eat weird food?
Oh, yeah, of course. They eat octopus, they eat squid, they eat this, it's like fermented soybeans. It's called natto. And it comes in like a styrofoam container and you have to like stir it up and so it's all slimy. At the beginning of my mission, there were probably usually only 2 missionaries per apartment, but since missionaries started coming in swarms of people, then there's usually 4 sisters to an apartment, I think. You sleep on the floor, on a futon. You don't have a bed. And if they're really old futons, it's not very comfortable. But if they're new ones, they're way comfy. I would probably prefer that more than a bed.
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that the church is relatively new there. And so you're still, in some ways, I think you're still working through some kinks. You know what I mean? You'll find even people who are like bishops and things who are still kind of learning, still figuring things out. That's not common or anything. There are like some 2nd, 3rd generation members, but not too many. But as a result, I think there's a lot of humility in the church. I think that's mostly what that leads to, because you can tell that they love their missionaries. Whereas I feel like in America, the missionaries are they are, I'm not sure what a good way to put this is. They're tools, you know, we do utilize them. They're teaching the gospel and we give them referrals and everything. But in Japan, like the missionaries are sort of the connection to the rest of the church almost. So they do trust you. They want you to be around. They love you in their meetings, you know, and every single ward or branch for the most part has a pair of missionaries assigned to them at a given time. But the people there are very eager to learn and continue to kind of strengthen their knowledge about the gospel. I do respect that they have a certain sense of reverence. I think that the culture of sort of conforming and not being obtrusive to others applies in church. Their kids are very well behaved compared to most American kids, you know. Yeah, I'd say that's about all I can think of. It wasn't a different experience. It was a different experience. You know, they kind of incorporate some of their own culture into aspects of church. For example, I think most missionaries kind of got a kick out of this. Whenever somebody would go up to the pulpit to pray, well, not all the time, but oftentimes they would actually announce that they're going to pray. Like if you were to say it in English, they walked up to the pulpit, they got in front of the microphone, they said, "I'm going to pray." And then they folded their arms and would start praying, which is something we wouldn't do here, right? But for some reason or another, it was normal there. And sometimes we'd kind of tease them. Like when we were doing it in English, we'd just be like, "I'm going to pray," and then start praying. But there's just different little things like that sort of get incorporated in. But yeah, I'd say overall, I did appreciate sort of the humble factor in the church there. I feel that they were good with that.